Welcome to this last session of today's celebration. Yeah. So we have been celebrating the 160th birthday of Rabindranath Tagore, and the last program, kindly arranged by our host from the Tagore Center for Natural Science and Philosophy, they have decided to end on a nice note of a musical interlude, and this will be provided in the form of Rabindranath's own composition, Rabindra Sangeet, by a noted exponent of Rabindra Sangeet, Rahul Mitra, and his accompanying musicians. Please the songs, in fact, have been selected to reflect Tagore's engagement with nature, which you heard about in the previous talks, and in particular the selection of the songs which has been made by Professor Sushant Dr. Gupta, he tells me was to stress the passing of the seasons, the changing of the sky, land, earth, plants. These are all things that Tagore would like to keenly observe and imbue into his musical compositions. And the songs that have been selected by him reflect this passage. Both of you. He has been selected in consultation with the singers. So they will embark on that program, and this is for the benefit of our visitors from abroad. These songs will hopefully give you a taste of what Rabindra Sangeet means to the Bengali psyche and the Bengali culture. But before we begin, we would like to felicitate the musicians, so may I invite you to come.
Needless to mention Dr. Sushant Gupta's name, or privileged to work with him. Next, and on rhythm, Mr. Gautam Datta, noted. Mr. Urban Bhattacharya, budding first place singer, veteran violinist, Mr. Amlan Haldar. Again, young budding such player, which is very, very rare in this area of music, Mr. Ritam Bakshi. Myself, Rahul Mitra, I do sing good.
Thank you very much, Praveen, for this generous introduction. I would like to just make one point. It was very easy to interact with Rahul because he has a scientist in him. He did geoscience, geology from IIT Kharagpur, and of course he holds a very senior position with the Tatas. So, science comes very naturally to him. So we have given a title to our presentation this evening, Song Offerings 1912. Song Offerings comprise English translations of original Bengali verses that had earlier appeared in Gitanjali, Itimanlo, Noibebdo, Heya, and other writings of the poet. It's indeed song offerings that constitute the citation of the 1913 Nobel Prize in Literature, Asia's first in any subject. Tagore wrote extensively and almost exclusively in Bengali. Why did he then venture to write in English? Was there a sudden impulsive decision, or was there a method in it? We have found no evidence to suggest any conscious planning behind the composition of song offerings. It appears to be a random wish on Tagore's part to try his hand at English, perhaps accentuated by the sea voyages full of expectations that took him from the shore of India to that of England in May 1912. It's also common knowledge that Rabindranath traveled extensively in the 1920s to Europe, the Americas, and Asian countries, especially China, Japan, Sri Lanka, and Iran. He abhorred nationalism. Indeed, he was universal in his outlook. Therefore, it was perhaps but natural that he would want to translate his writings into English in order to make them accessible to a wider audience, English having been already an accepted international mode of communication. Besides, Tagore was often vilified by his own countrymen, and he found solace from a more appreciative Western audience. In support of this assessment, we translate from Alap Alochana between Rabindranath Tagore and Dilip Kumar Roy in Shongit Chinta. I was impulsively putting into English some of the verses of Gita. Basically, I had nothing else to do as I was down in bed with illness. I could not dare to think, even in my wildest dream, to get the English versions published. The reason is, I firmly believed that I was incapable of writing in English which was worthy of publication. When my Gitanjali translations landed in the hands of EX, the great Irish poet, he decided to invite a bunch of English writers and literary connoisseurs to Rothenstein's home to read aloud the poems. I was naturally embarrassed because of two reasons. First, I could never satisfy my Bengali listeners within 10 to 12 lines of poetry which they considered inadequate. They even attributed the compactness of the poems to my own inadequacy. Many of them would even lament that I was devoting most of my time to writing songs. They saw in this the onset of the new moon time when, like the size of the moon, my poetry was also getting shrunk in size. Second, I had shown some of my English translations with some trepidation to knowledgeable Bengalis. They had quite condescendingly proclaimed that my effort was not bad and that my English was not incorrect. At that time, I was not acquainted with C.F. Andrews, whom I could have used as a bouncing board. In that gathering at the Rothenstein home, Yeats read out just 5 to 7 poems. The British listeners heard quietly and then left quietly without the customary exchange of greetings. I returned home that night feeling rather small. The next day, however, I saw a flurry of appreciative mails. I was totally overwhelmed by the unexpected recognition that I received from a distant land. In this context, it is interesting to analyze the bard's views on music in general and Indian music vis-a-vis Western music, mostly articulated in the decade of 1920. I'm afraid you already heard about it in the film. He professes to Einstein in 1930, it is difficult to analyze together the effect of Eastern and Western music in our minds. I am deeply moved by Western music. I feel that it is great, that it is vast in its structure and grand in comparison. But our music touches me more deeply by its fundamental lyrical appeal. To this, Einstein asks, when did you first hear Western music? Tagore responds, at 17, when I first came to Europe, but even before that in my household, I heard the music of Chopin and others at an early age. To Romarola in 1926, he had earlier said, I've always felt the immense power of European music. I love Beethoven and points of bark. Yet, 17 long years after receiving the accolade from the Swedish Academy, the poet asked H.G. Wells in 1930, I have composed nearly 2,000 songs. They are all sealed to the West because they cannot properly be given to you in your own notations. They would perhaps not be intelligible to your people even if I could get them written down.